We have been absolutely robbed of a peak Star Wars game, one that would have made history and sounds amazing. And today, we'll be covering everything that may have been. Greetings, apprentices of the Force, and welcome back to the archives. The Force Unleashed duology is to this day considered to be the peak of Force-based gameplay. Through the eyes and body of Starkiller and his clone, we got to experience a level of power that had only been dreamed of in the galaxy. In the first game, Galen Marek begins as Vader's assassin, and nothing more than a tool for evil until he learns the ways of the light and the Jedi, and fights back against his cruel master and the Emperor. In the second game, Galen's rogue clone, one who was almost twice as powerful as the original, goes on a journey of self-discovery. The second game ended on a cliffhanger, and since that day, we have yet to see the completion of Starkiller's story. Although we cannot bring you the game, we can bring you all the information that we know about it and its story. So, let's begin with the story of The Force Unleashed 3, the completion of the Galen Marek saga. The Force Unleashed 3 not only promised to give us the conclusion of Starkiller, but would also may have been a legendary game. We will be covering everything we've learned about The Force Unleashed 3 in our deep dive into its research. It's important to note that according to Sam Witwer, the person behind Galen Marek, the game never actually made it out of any idea stages, and not even into the concept art stage before it was completely canned. Unfortunately, everything we know about The Force Unleashed 3 and what exists about the game is relegated to a single conversation between Sam Witwer, Hayden Blackman, who was the writer of the first and the second game, and David Collins, the voice of the droid Proxy. But from what little we know, it would have been nothing short of excellent. The Force Unleashed 2 ended on a notorious cliffhanger, with the canon ending of the story being the light side option. At the very end of the journey, the clone of Galen Marek, who had effectively replaced the original, unleashed his fury on Vader, and believed that his lover, Juno, had been killed by him. After a battle, Starkiller defeated the Dark Lord of the Sith and had him on his knees. But right at the moment that he was about to take his vengeance, the clone chose mercy, choosing instead to have Vader face galactic justice instead of taking his personal revenge. The Jedi Rom Coda arrives with a contingent of rebel soldiers in order to arrest Vader, awaiting trial in the True Republic. It turns out that Juno hadn't died and would join Galen and the rebels. Vader would then be transported to the ship known as the Rogue Shadow and held in a prison cell, bolted to a table. Officially captured by the rebellion and Starkiller, Galen decides to visit him one last time, letting his once master know that since he had spared the Dark Lord's life, this meant that Vader had no more control. But the Dark Lord questions this and rebukes what Galen is saying. He promises him that as long as Juno lives, that Vader will always control his destiny. The day ends with Starkiller joining Juno in the cockpit and blasting off into deep space, off to another adventure. But unbeknownst to the two of them, the Slave One detaches from an Imperial Star Destroyer and follows them. Boba Fett is now back in the hunt. And this is where The Force Unleashed 3 would have picked right back up. Over a strange planet we've not seen before, Boba would shoot down the Rogue Shadow, forcing a crash landing. And it's here where the new experience truly begins. Vader and Starkiller would be forced to reluctantly work together in order to survive and escape the deadly planet successfully. The game would have introduced a co-op system where two players could join one another in an adventure, one controlling Lord Vader and the other Starkiller. This all happens as a result of the Emperor at long last deciding to replace Vader with someone not only more powerful, but also more loyal. It was revealed that Sidious had been the one that had sent Boba Fett to eliminate and impede the two dark side warriors as his plan unfolds. As the game continues, the new threat to the galaxy would not only require Galen Marek, but also the help of Lord Vader to overcome. However, as the story plays out, we would constantly have to question whether or not Vader could be trusted. The game itself would eschew the level design and a linear story in favor of a more open world adventure. Witwer and Blackman mentioned that it would have been a lot more of a physics sandbox, which means a heavily destructible environment and lots of interaction with the world around you using the Force. The game was slated to release on next-gen consoles, being a title for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the Wii U. It would have been a celebration of two powerhouses that are Vader and Starkiller, as we would have seen them at their absolute peak working together to combine their immense power in the Force. Sam Witwer was very enthusiastic about the story and had a heavy role in its creation. We even know at one point that Starkiller was going to systematically deconstruct Lord Vader limb by limb to ensure that he could not escape. And this would be a hugely humiliating moment for Lord Vader. one where he was truly weakened and embarrassed in front of an apprentice, something that the Dark Lord would not forget. The game would also apparently end with Darth Vader definitively defeating Starkiller, with this being an idea that was thrown around many times during the development of the Force Unleashed games apparently, with Vader using Galen as his pawn, and then revealing that he too was always holding back, unleashing his own power in the Force if you will. So, what exactly happened to this third game? To keep it brief, The Force Unleashed 2 was a critical and a commercial failure, and a very disappointing follow-up to the first game, which had been the highest-selling Star Wars game of all time at that point. Blackman reportedly didn't even want to make the second game about Starkiller at all, but about a Prime Yoda back in the day wielding his massive power in the Force with wild abandon, highlighting Yoda's progression into the Jedi Grand Master, but first, learning to control his abilities. However, he was only given 3 weeks to write the story for the Force Unleashed sequel, and the development of the game would be heavily rushed, with the behind-the-scenes drama in the higher-ups of Lucasfilm resulting in the firing of over a third of the first Force Unleashed game. The failure of the Force Unleashed 2 was so catastrophic that it caused even more layoffs, and the talks of a third game were called into question. Not only this, but Blackman was already getting ready to leave and start his own company. Following, however, Lucasfilm did announce that The Force Unleashed 3 would be made. However, they slated its release until after Episode 7 released. But this is when tragedy struck. Lucasfilm was purchased in 2012, and Disney reorganized the entire LucasArts company and completely shut down development on a third Force Unleashed game. For me, this is one of the most tragic losses of a Star Wars game, right next to Battlefront 3 and Star Wars 1313. The number 3 just seems to be unlucky for most Star Wars games. Hopefully Cal Kestis is safe though, but I actually would love to see just how insane The Force Unleashed 3 would have gotten. They ramped it up to an 11 with the second game, giving the clone of Starkiller even more power and crazier feats. To see him having refined these abilities and working alongside Vader in a co-op setting would have gotten to see some insane force-based combat and team-up mechanics. Perhaps the game may even pull what they did in LEGO Star Wars and have Player 1 and Player 2 fight each other as Starkiller and Vader. But the sandbox open world style is also very interesting and a big departure from the first two games. We aren't entirely sure whether the game would have just stayed put on the first planet that they had crashed on, or if the two of them would have got to hop around world to world in the galaxy in order to complete their quest. Again, information is very rare about The Force Unleashed 3, but one thing is exceedingly clear. It was going to be a very ambitious game. Very few open world Star Wars games exist, as with it being described as a sandbox, there likely would have been a heavily customizable option to both your character and the environment around you. Another tragic loss is whether or not the villain Sidious would have created would have been a great addition to Star Wars lore. A threat that requires both Vader and Starkiller to join forces would have been an insane one. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information on what exactly this threat was meant to be. What would Sidious have created to finally replace Vader? One which neither he nor Starkiller could take out alone. Perhaps another clone of Galen Marek like the Dark Apprentice that Vader had, or even the Dark Apprentice directly. Maybe even Palpatine deciding to cross his own DNA with Galen Marek's, producing an all-powerful clone of himself in order to train as his own. The possibilities are endless, and the lore would have expanded all the more with crazier Force abilities. But anyway friends, this is really and unfortunately everything we know about The Force Unleashed 3. But tell us your thoughts on the game. What are your thoughts on the story and the idea of Vader and Starkiller teaming up against a larger threat? But in the end, a final confrontation between Master and Apprentice that would leave with Vader being the victor. As always, my fellow scholars of the Force, thank you for joining us in the archives, and may the Force be with you.